Hua and our distinguished panel for Symposium 1. Now I'd like to invite the chairperson for the second symposium, Dr. Chang Haiding, to invite the panel speakers. Dr. Chang, please.
The chairman is out of the room, but Mr. Lawrence Wee, Prof. Goh Lee Gan, Prof. Kwa Ae Hyok, ladies and gentlemen, so far the good news of aging has been brought to us largely by doctors. Now the good news about aging is going to be brought to us by AAA speakers: architect, anthropologist. I have a very simple task. I have to do three things. One, timekeeping. All the speakers have been told 20 minutes, but I shall beseech them on your behalf, 15 minutes if possible, or less. My second task is to introduce the topic and then to introduce speaker by speaker. My third task is very simple. Lunch is supposed to be at 12:40, and I think it would be foolish for anybody on stage or otherwise to try to prevent all of us from enjoying our lunch. So the topic today is inclusive environment for good aging. It is a topic that interests all people who live in cities and all societies that have aging populations. Therefore, it is a topic that will certainly interest us Singaporeans who live in a highly urbanized society. I think we are the second densest population in the world, if you count Hong Kong as a country. Our three speakers will discuss with us how the environment affects the older person. Prof. Fang will tell us how the environment can be transformative in supporting active aging in high-density urban setting. Dr. Chong will speak on creative aging societies, which enable older adults to age well. And our third speaker, Professor Tang, is particularly concerned about the intergenerational relations in aging societies. She observes that instead of talking about intergenerational conflict, the trend is now towards intergenerational solidarity. I think we can look forward to three great presentations on a subject close to our heart, and I will introduce the first speaker, Associate Professor Fang John Chai. He is the Director of the Center for Aging Research in the Environment at the School of Design and Environment in NUS. Professor Fang was a professional architect with 30 years of practice before he turned researcher. Professor Fang, please.
Thank you for the introduction. I must thank the organizer for including this segment in the conference. We are not scientists, and I will not have any scientific data to show you. In fact, when I conceived of this title about over a month ago, it was more of a question rather than trying to assert certain definition of what transformative environment is about. So I will try to unpack the two terms that I have used here, transformative environment and successful aging, based on my own understanding. But first, just a word about the background picture here. It was taken about 20 years ago in Kunming at a park. What struck me then, well, of course I was 20 years younger and wasn't thinking about aging at that time. But what struck me then was that the way the people appropriated the space, a public space nonetheless, and use it for activities that they enjoy. At the background, you can see people doing what the Chinese call guangchang plaza dance or exercises, or whatever you call that. And in the foreground, you see a group of people playing mahjong. And you can notice that the table that they use is actually a table that they actually brought there, and including the stools and of course the mahjong itself. I think that this kind of organic ground-up appropriation of urban spaces, which is very spontaneous, which is very informal, which is adaptive, they are non-programmed, meaning they are not designed, and therefore, because of that, I think they are very, the people identify with the usage of the park. And that, I think, is what I would suggest is a characteristics of transformative environment. In this slide, I will just ask two questions, which, of course, trying to unpack the term successful aging. And more importantly is how does that relate to our urban environment? I use this as my frame of reference. American gerontologists who, over 50 years ago, make this statement that we are always trying to define and measure and try to understand what successful aging means. It is, of course, a preoccupation of an urban society to think about successful aging. There are two reasons why this is the case. One is that if we differentiate aging in a natural environment, by natural environment I do not mean wilderness in nature, but more the sort of rural villages. And if we compare that with an urban environment, we find that there are several major differences, characteristics of these two ways in which we age. In a more natural kind of environment, the transformation is always with nature as the dominant factor. And therefore, the identification or the perception of aging is very much an ecological and biological, chronological kind of understanding. Whereas in the urban environment, most of us would have, in our lifetime, relocated shift house or whatever several times for different reasons, whether it's for school, for work, for social status, and so forth. I suggest that this discontinuity causes us to have a different understanding of place, and place, of course, play a very important part in our memory as we age. Secondly is in the more natural kind of process, the environment is very familiar, and you are there since birth. So the scenery is essentially static, and we probably understand the environment in greater depth. Whereas in the urban environment, a lot of our buildings, our landmarks, have been erased in the name of intensification of land and so forth, progress, economic progress, and the new demands on land use. And the scenery is, again, dynamic. Of course, you can just recall the demolition of our National Theatre, our National Library, and all those beloved landmarks. You know what I mean. This, again, is a very important planning kind of consideration. In urban environment, there's a need to try to retain some of these more iconic landmarks that people use as a reference in their daily lives. The third point is that in a natural kind of environment, the proximity of the extended family provides a lot of support. Whereas in an urban environment, the tendency is for young families to emerge, to grow, and form nuclear family. And of course, that then poses the problem of distance between family members and the elderly who is aging. In the natural environment, food is essentially sustenance, right? You just eat what you harvest, what you grow. Whereas here, we eat in the urban environment of Singapore, we take food as a pleasure. And then the pleasure, of course, leads to problems like diabetes. I think these are health issues that we are fully familiar with. Again, the next point is that subsistence living is very much part of the natural environment, where what you harvest is probably just enough to sustain you. And yet, in a more urban kind of environment, it is, we talk about retirement, right? And with retirement comes leisure and time and idleness. Natural environment are essentially low technology dependence, whereas in our kind of society, highly dependent on technology. Of course, those are advantages, not necessarily a disadvantage. Again, comparing the availability of medical care, sanitation, and so forth, there's a big difference. In a dense environment, the advantage is that the delivery of this care and other services is a lot more easier, more efficient because of the density and the proximity. In the natural environment, the stress, there's a lot of, a lot less stress due to the kind of natural slow space. What in architectural term we use the term slow space to discuss, to define the kind of a quality, idyllic kind of environment, landscape, and so forth. This, of course, has an impact because humans are essentially biophilic animals, and we have a very deep affinity with nature. And in comparison, or rather in contrast, the urban environment poses a lot of stress. We have just read in the newspaper, I think yesterday, in the report, in Beijing, the problem of pollutant on creating a lot of problem in the skin. And then Hong Kong, again, due to pollution and haze and so forth, the relationship to cancer in the elderly. So I think the stress in the environment comes from different aspects. First of all is what we call the climatic condition, but also a lot of human-created problem, like friction between people because of the density, like problem with mobility, and then the distribution of amenities, and then crowding is a very important factor. Particularly in the urban environment, elderly people will have faced a major challenge where the high speed of movement, sort of fast pace, the converse of the slow space idea, causes anxiety. I think this is and sometimes confusion. So the people become disorientated in that situation. And lastly, of course, it's a very spatial differentiation between the two types of environment. Right, again, another point that we do take note of is the shifting old age continuum. It used to be that if we just adopt the UN definition, 3 age group, but of course, since then, there are more differentiation in terms of the age group. Most of us probably here are not quite in the old age yet, but some of us are actually in what we call the young old, and then you have the old. Again, this definition is proposed by Newgarden, the gerontologist, and subsequently supported by a British social historian who looked at that by the term, by the way we depend on people. So when we are young, we are very dependent. And then as we go into the second age or the adulthood, we are very independent. And then as we move on to the third age, it's about personal fulfillment. And then lastly, again, when you become frail, the so-called OO or the fourth age is again dependence. And this again, of course, has a very direct impact on the way we plan our cities, the way we plan our neighborhood, and then, of course, the way we plan our apartments, our houses. So here is I think we are probably very familiar with this, the Singapore framework. Successful aging has been defined in the 1999 Interministerial Committee on Aging report as a process. I think this is interesting because we are aware that aging is very much a process. And the needs of people changes as our socio-economic status rises. Also our demands, our perception, and so forth changes. The baby boomer generation, which is the so-called the third age, has certainly a lot difference in terms of our expectations compared to, say, our family, my parents, for instance, who are in the 80s. So the process is therefore an evolving notion. And here we have what we have commonly called the many helping hands so-called approach, where different level of scale of so-called aging from individual to nation takes responsibility differently. But the important key points are basically we want to age with dignity and security, and then the notion of aging in place was introduced. Aging in place, again, is very much an urban phenomenon. I think, again, if you look at the natural environment where one ages in a traditional rural village, there really isn't such a concept. People just age and in the place where they were born. Here, we are very concerned about that, which is that mainly because of the several relocations that we face when we grow old, from the childhood to adulthood, and then finally to old age. And the policies that are listed on the right side, they are the ones that intersect with the environment. Monetization, for instance, is a very important part because it frees up certain cash for retirement. Issues like safety and so forth, social participation and healthcare, I think these are issues that we are quite familiar with. But the challenge, I think, is one major challenge is in mobility. We read a lot about the conflict between the pedestrian and the personal mobility vehicle, like the mobility scooter and all those devices, motorized devices, and then the conflict with vehicular traffic. So I think these are the challenges that we face in planning transformative environment. How do we ensure the safe movement of the elderly from his or her dwelling unit to wherever he or she wants to go? So I will just quickly run through without the time is catching up. Just again, two quick points about what makes a transformative environment. There's a list of aspects or factors that relates to well-being and which has a direct impact on the environment. I will not attempt to run through them, but most of them you are probably familiar with. In this slide, I attempt to highlight that the environment is very much an intrinsic part of us. We can imagine, for instance, in this auditorium, we can imagine the auditorium without any of us here. But we can never imagine a condition where all of us are here without an auditorium. So the place, the environment is part of our growing old, and each of us actually is part of many human groups in our lifetime, and in each of these human groups, we inhabit different kind of environment, from childhood, from school, from workplace, to being a resident of the town, and then being this group called the elderly, and for those who have dementia, the group called dementia. All this exists within the environment, of which the built environment is the prevailing and the predominant condition in a high-rise, high-density situation. Just some theories. I think I will not run through this. I think you can probably understand them. That we consider in when we think about the environment and aging, the environmental press theory, salutogenesis, and so forth, positive distraction, environmental complexity theories. And WHO, of course, in 2015 published this particular report. Of the 8 aspects that they highlighted, in fact, all 8 aspects actually have sort of a consideration for the environment, but the first 3 are the ones that are directly impacting us. Okay, come to the 2 very crucial aspects that we face that has a direct impact for the environment. One is diabetes and dementia, and incidentally, both of these conditions actually can can have intervention in terms of the environment, in even preventing and not just in terms of care. So I think the question then is, what are we really concerned about? I would draw your attention to the statement at the bottom. A transformative environment for dementia is really also good design for aging in general and for everyone else too. So I think this is the primary premise in which we think about the environment. And therefore, the kind of objectives that we hope to consider, they are all aimed at the general space, the environment, the everyday world that we inhabit. And I think it is important to note this, that a specially designed space for an elderly may only work for a certain situation, whereas if we take a whole of environment approach and try to transform the everyday world, I think then we are probably creating a sustainable model of a transformative environment. These are some objectives that I would like to so-called propose. One is the community is the nexus of aged care. I think it is not the institutional care like in nursing home and so forth. As a sustainable long-term model, the community is the basis, I think. Secondly, aging in place is the model that we should look at and move towards, and I think we are already moving towards that. Thirdly, there must be diversity of lifestyles to enable autonomy. Autonomy is a major consideration in design and planning. Of course, the flip side of that is the safety, the issue of safety. So it's always sort of a balance between enabling autonomy and reducing risk. The fourth point is nature as a healing agent. As I mentioned earlier, humans are essentially biophilic, and therefore we need a lot of contact with nature, whether it's looking at plants or just having a sense of the condition of the sky, the changing condition that tells us the time and so forth. Fifth is the livability, which is very much a planning term. Again, some of these concepts, there are a lot of discussion and arguments as to what constitutes livability. But I think in a high-rise, high-density situation, it's all the more poignant that we create environments that are livable. And then, of course, lastly is the use of technology as a compensation for some of the deficits. Some more detailed consideration that we will consider if in creating transformative environment. Outdoor spaces, placemaking, wayfinding is a very important part. Mobility, as I've mentioned earlier, the scale of environment, and of course the basic safety features like universal design and so forth. And then the distribution of amenities is very important. As we heard earlier, the social network, walkability, these are very important concepts in thinking about aging in an urban environment, and they have planning implications. But it's not just about the distribution of amenities, but also the integration of land use and the kind of the stimuli that we actually introduce in the environment. I will have to skip through this quickly. Just show some example, a recent example that I went to in Seoul. It looks very ordinary from the outside, but what is interesting here is that they put the car park under an entire deck. What you see here is actually not the ground level, it's actually a deck. But the deck is so well planted, so well landscaped, and so well integrated with the blocks and with amenities and so forth, that the people use it a lot. And this is not just one example, there are several examples in Seoul that actually adopt the same strategy. I think this is a very important aspect of transformative environment. Okay, Singapore, we do have some of these spaces, but not in terms of the segregation of cars. In this case, in Tampines Avenue 4 and Avenue 7 intersection, the integration of the block and amenities like playground, like the market, and then in this case is Clementi Town Center and Ayer Rajah. On the right side, the Ayer Rajah is actually a particular typology, what you call typology, where you have the flats on top of shops. It was introduced by HDB in the 1980s, but somehow they actually lost that approach. And some of our newer towns are a lot less friendly because the amenities are very far away. So the real challenge to us is the car-centric planning. If we imagine that we adopt the solution that Korea has used, a landscape area, then the problem, the kind of safety hazard for elderly would not be there. So lastly, I'll just show a few more slides of some of the more recent masters in architecture thesis project that talks about 2 points that I want to make very quickly. One is the reclaiming the human ground connection. I think this is a very important aspect, not just for safety, but also to promote the social life and so forth. So these are just some visuals to illustrate that point. The other point is that sky linkages are very important. I do not want to use the word community because community has a lot more other kind of connotation. But the ability to link and allow people to interact at the upper level of their block will help to encourage the elderly to come out of the flat and interact with the neighbors and perhaps look at the world outside of their own dwelling unit. So with this, I will just end the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It is now my pleasure to call our second speaker on the subject of creative aging cities. Assistant Professor Chong Keng Hua is a teacher of architecture and sustainable design at Singapore University of Technology and Design. Dr. Chong has a book which is coming out called Creative Aging Societies, which he will talk to us about now. Dr. Chong.
Thank you, Dr. Chiang. I was reminded to have only 15 minutes, so I'm bringing along my timer, so I'm going to start now. Right, good morning, everyone. So I won't delay your lunchtime. I'll go straight into the point. Just to correct on the title, is Creative Aging Cities. So we're still looking at the city scale, but we are actually looking at society, rightly pointed out. And as we look at cities in the past decades or so, we have been led by the idea of creative city. Charles Laundrie, Richard Florida has been piloting all these ideas, so we attract young people, mobile people, talented people like yourself, going around the world. We have a global city, and that's what Singapore has been, chasing after. But what about the growing population of elderly in the cities? Do they also have to reinvent themselves to be creative and join the creative economy? So we ask ourselves this question. How do we then cater for our growing population of older population? We also look at the WHO age-friendly city guidelines and many other guidelines as well in the world right now, whether or not they are universally apply in this context, especially in our Asian high-rise, high-density context. And you can see that this kind of context, how do we define an age-friendly, active aging or aging in place? So these are some of the topics that we have been investigating together with my colleagues, sociologists and psychologists in our school in the past 4 to 5 years. And whether or not, this is the most important question if I may, can aging be a positive force? I think it ties in very well with the topic of today as well, good news of aging, that it can influence our future urban design. So before we actually, start any design, we conduct some of the survey, and this is not done by us. Just looking at the statistics, we look at the top 3 most aging population in Asia. We look at Japan, South Korea, and Singapore. And Singapore in particular, if you look at the graph, it is the speed of aging that is the highest probably in this region that we are more concerned of. So based on this, we went around these 3 cities and conduct our background studies to understand. You can see that even though we are talking about elderly sitting, there can be many conditions under the high density condition that are sitting in HDB void deck, in South Korea, in the rooftop, and the side streets along the streets of Tokyo. So how do we then accommodate different kind of situation and condition of this aging? So I won't go through in details all the cities that we have studied, but this is in South Korea. Many approaches of trying to dealing with the aging population, both in the rural landscape and also in the cities. One of the case study that we did is in Jiangsu village. Jiangsu translated to English is longevity. Many of the elderly are above 100 years old, and we don't know what's the reason. Probably because of the slope, because they climb up and down every day, healthier than all of us. And so some of the intervention they have done, they work with the neighboring schools, children to actually make the village more beautiful. One of the reasons why they can't attract a developer to come into this area is also because this is a conservation area. If you look at the city wall behind, back in the 16th century, none of the development can go higher than that. So no developer interested in this area. So they are left to themselves to see how they can reinvent the city. And not just the children, they actually grab a group of elderly who are living in the village, and this group of elderly are carpenters themselves in the past. They have retired since, but they come together again and form a new social enterprise called Doknek Musu, translated in English, village carpenter, literally. And they go around repairing houses, building cafe, making museum out of the dilapidated housing. And these are a lot of things that they've done to go around, in the village and building up a new village by themselves, what they call the new village movement. So what we learn from here is that there is a new kind of social capital that we are talking about. It's social creative capital. How can we tap on the creativity of the elderly, and together with the NGO, together with the architects who've done this project pro bono, and working with the officers in the authority, and how can we revitalize the aging estate, such as one in South Korea. So jump into Japan. We also went around studying many cities. And then in the end, we came back to Tokyo and look at what are some of the amazing streetscape that they have revitalized through leveraging on the forces of aging. So one of them is Sugamo. Sugamo Shotengai shopping street is famous for their aging related products, especially for the cater for the elderly. And not just cater for the elderly, all the shops are run by the elderly themselves. So it's an elderly serving elderly model. And you can see all the vibrant streetscape and the public spaces environment. It has been termed the Harajuku for the old, actually, in Japan. On the other hand, we had Dogoshikinza, which is a different model, not just targeting at the elderly, but because of the famous traditional food that they have attracted a lot of media, attention. Japanese are crazy about food. You see all the variety program, go around food hunting. So this place become famous because of that. You see all the trophies and award-winning restaurant and things like that. They attract a lot more younger generation. So it is a more inclusive environment. So not just on the front of the street, behind the street, we see how the senior community actually come together and actually make a very nice environment for their living quarters. So in front is commercial, behind residential. It creates a very dynamic, symbiotic relationship between their working environment, living environment, so that they can actually live harmoniously. And so we learned from this that there are many different kind of model apart from this. So, but one focusing on elderly, the other one focusing on everybody, but still, with elderly in mind. So it's a more aging-friendly model. So how can we apply or learn from this in Singapore context? So this is something that we ask ourselves. So I won't go through this. I think you are more expert than me looking at the progress of aging policies and also business model and healthcare, that we are shifting towards a more home-based, more step-down care, different kind of family structure that involve a lot more community involvements. So this is some of the trend that we have picked up and see how we can respond to. But guess what? Human never change, even though environment change. So how can we then still adapt to the biological, physiological desire of human as we age? Okay, before I want to ask a question. We all know that Singaporeans are famous for these 5 C in the past. You know what are the 5 C's? Cash, credit card, car, condominium, and career, or some say clubs, right? So these are the 5 C's in the past. But now that we age, what are the new 5 C's that we need? So this is what we found. The new 5 C's are not condominium. Continuity, compensation, connection, contribution, and challenge. These are not from us. We learned it from another developmental psychologist as well, Andrew Scala from the Stanford University. And, but of course, he didn't coin the 5C. We termed it the 5C because we saw it, we said, wow. But we want to see how they apply in Singapore context. So continuity means that you can continue to do what you want to do as in the past. If you can't do what you want to do, you are compensated by other means, like for example, universal design, barrier-free design, and so on. Connection is how you have meaningful relationship with other people. Contribution is how you can still contribute back to the environment and your surrounding. And challenge is how you are socially, mentally, and physically challenged, that you still want to enjoy that learning, growing process of life. We are also trying to be, since it's a scientific conference, I put in a few scientific graphs so to show that we are more scientific as well. Well, actually I will be a psychologist, so I didn't come up with that. So she tabulated for us. It's a small sample. We hope that we have more funding in future so we can do a larger sample size. But based on this, we can already see some of the inclination. So we look at continuity. Regardless of the connection level, housing typology, or depression level, in fact, all of them rated quite high. That means our government is doing very well in terms of providing a very good environment for them to roam around the city, coming down through the lift at every floor, ramps. So they are actually really much enjoy this. Those who don't enjoy it, they probably have their own personal, difficulties. That's why. So we look at compensation. Okay, we are also doing very well. They feel that all these support systems, the services, social services, are doing well. They can get their support very well. So there's no problem. So this is the good news I want to bring you. A not so good news is across all the different types of people that we interview above 60s, seems like there's no connection to their own background in terms of connection. So whether or not they're less depressed or more depressed, they just have different amount of friends. So I guess this is something that maybe you can tell us why. But the bad news is that in terms of contribution, almost all of them rated very, very low. They feel that they don't have much to contribute. And in terms of challenge as well, they feel that they are not being challenged. Even though they come to a lot of programs, they feel that they can be more challenged actually if there are other things that in life. So here, that's why I want to introduce creativity. What about creativity? Which very much related to challenge as well as contribution. So can our seniors community be creative? So we walk around the different neighborhood and trying to identify different kind of spaces or different kind of activities that we can get a hint of creativity from this group of people. So on the left is what we provided for them, all the different social spaces, activity center, and reactive spaces that we formalize a void deck with fixed chairs and tables. On the right, you see different kind of appropriation, like rightly put out by Professor Fong just now as well, and also maybe some kind of occupation process that's going on. So let me share with you some of the examples that we have come across. I'm sure you know the news of those chess players who's hogging up the corridor and blocking the space, and then the town council suddenly banned the chess playing on the streets. But of course, they take down the poster later. But what we found out is that there are many more such chess player corner around, and it wasn't the chess table that was provided for them that they're using, but they brought their own stools and chairs and whatnot to actually play. So in fact, there is just another stone chess table right beside them in front, and nobody is using that. So that's very peculiar. So we realized that why, I mean, we interviewed some of them, and why they chosen this corner is because it's darker. So they can hide somewhere behind the letterbox. But yet it is exposed to the walkway, so anybody can just walk by and be a spectator and join them. So it is that kind of very ambiguous spaces that actually attract this group of chess players that they want to use this space. What about the aunties? They have their own corner. So in fact, we found many of such casinos outside Marina Bay. So it's actually their daily routine after they come back home from the market. Every 10 o'clock, they will sit down for games of poker cards or sometimes mahjong before they head upstairs to cook for lunch. So it become part of their, morning habit. And the uncles also like to stay around the drop-off point. I'm sure you come across many of these instances. And why? And we asked them, we interviewed many of them, and because there are many people come and go. So they want to see, they want to be the spectator looking at what is going on in life without involving themselves. So that is how the kind of a backseat. But what we actually realized one thing is that it reminds them actually back in the old days where they sit idling at a coffee shop. Coffee shop is usually along the main road. Wow, okay, speed it up. So they actually performing a function, a social function for the community because they act as a guard post. And you see a lot of these sittings, how we then trying to invent spaces so that we can cater for these kind of activities, right? So guess what that's in front of the steel chairs? It's a TV, but it's never open. But what we realized beside this space is another TV. There's, the seniors actually brought down, this is a senior citizen corner. They brought down themselves and nobody steal it. So that's what we want to see. How can we then encourage this form of new kind of community movement that they make their own place? Perhaps this is the kind of a hint of creativity that we can actually tap on. But of course, a lot of seniors actually brought out their own chair. Okay, it's time to stop, but 5 more slides. And many of them were removed not by other seniors, but actually by other forces. So we want to see what other kind of occupation that can actually assist up in the sky, like what Prof. Student has proposed, the sky decks and all that. We actually can find it already in Singapore. Many of those communities that's formed. It's a kitchen at the staircase lobby. And many of these Malay aunties actually gather around, share foods, and actually create a new kind of community. And these are in the rental flats. Void deck. We see this particular instance where the uncles actually collecting a lot of throwaway stuff by the residents, collecting a lot of paintings, a lot of sittings, a lot of become a playground for the kids. And this is very important because the aunties will bring their grandson down to enjoy, so they will come down. And gym. And this uncle actually repair all the throwaway gym and then they make it useful again. And it become a free gym membership for the residents. And we see this like a pot of porridge, and this become a community maniac as well. Everybody will come down just to enjoy this free bowl of porridge every day by this uncle. So very simple, just providing a free pot of porridge for everyone, you can already create a community. And many of such instances. Besides void deck, we see gardens outside their first-story flat, and this unfortunately has been removed due to a lot of negotiation. But on the other hand, they are able to have it in front of their house and become a community corner. And I visited them last Christmas, and they have actually a community party out of that. It's amazing. And of course, we had all the farmlands, and this is along the Malayan railway line. It was taken back, and then a lot of illegal farming they put together, and they create new farm. So we actually, I know the time is up, so we already have a video for you. So if you want, you can just go to our website and watch the video. Okay, and we are still documenting it. It will be part of the chapter that we will actually, publish next year, hopefully. So my last conclusion, So we've been talking about aging in place to, sort of continuity and conversation. We're talking about age-friendly to provide the connection among the seniors. We talk about active aging so that they can actually participate in all the events and so on. However, is that all that we have that we can offer? So why not shift from aging in place to aging in community? As many of you have pointed out, that community is the main force that can actually bring people together rather than the place itself. Why not talk about aging friendly? It's not just about the senior-centric spaces, but also a more interest-centric, because if you talk about chess playing, both young and old like to play chess. If you talk about cycling, both young and old like to cycle. So can we create spaces that is more inclusive, and then so that the seniors are actually be part of the communities? And I think Lenin was going to talk about intergenerational spaces as well. So this is also very important. And can we shift from active aging to creative aging rather than just ask them to join us and join our activity? Get them to create their own games, get them to organize their own activity, and they can be more creative through leveraging on their own social creative capital. So based on that, we actually done a couple of exercises, and this is the new book that we'll probably launch next year. So we work with NTUC Health right now, working with different group of seniors community in Marsiling. And recently we just completed this senior wellness center. Just pleased to share with you that we just got the Best Silver Architecture Prize on in the Elder Care Award this year. So with that, thank you very much. Feel free to ask any question later. Thank you.
Who will speak on promoting intergenerational approach in inclusive society for all. She is the head of the Department of Japanese Studies in NUS, and she's an anthropologist with interest in aging and in intergenerational relations. Professor Tang.
Hello, good afternoon. We are after 12 now, so I hope you are holding up. I changed the title to intergenerational aging in case you think that we're talking about aging the whole day and you thought, okay, that's what the society is only comprised of. It's not. A society comprises of different generations, and I think as our previous speakers have been talking about, that there is a need to really look into inclusiveness of how older people is included in the whole multi-generational society. So I'm going to start with just a recap of what Dr. Amy Koh has talked about, the action plan for successful aging. This seems to be a very exciting plan for Singapore, for the policymakers, and she talked about 12 areas which I think have been divided broadly into these 3 key themes. So I just want to bring to your attention that when I talk about intergenerational aging, intergenerational approaches, then it really falls quite nicely into the second theme on Kampong for All Ages, where we talk about cohesive homes with intergenerational harmony. And I'm really pleased that they include intergenerational harmony in that area. And another important area is to physically talk about co-location of elder care and childcare facilities, which they will be piloting out in 10 new housing and development estates. So I think for those of us who are working on intergenerational field, I think in Singapore, this is really something that we really are very excited and looking forward in the next 10 years. So when we talk about intergenerational ideas, maybe in Singapore, we kind of have more ideas of more common for us to say that we see our older and younger generations coming together a little bit more because we are living closer, and it used to be more common for people to live together in 3-generational households. But the idea of intergenerational in the 1970s and 80s, or as early as 1949, when this statement came out from the UK Royal Commission on Population, is really that of conflict, that of worries that younger generation worrying that older generation is going to take away their resources, and So I think this statement really succinctly brings out the worries that there are. Here, it says that if all the old sit back on their first pensionable birthday and draw a pension with which they compete for consumer goods made by decreasing section of the population, the standard of life of both generations will inevitably be endangered. So that was the message on intergenerational. When you talk about intergenerational, probably back in 70s and 80s, in the academic circles too, there was a lot of concerns and a lot of research that came out about conflicts. But we have been seeing a shift quite recently in the last 2 decades and 3 decades, because people are realizing, policymakers are realizing that this is not the way to go. If you have generations that compete against each other, then we're really going to, all generations are going to suffer. So in Europe, in fact, you are already seeing things like, when you talk about aging, they actually talks about generations coming together and using terms like intergenerational solidarity. So 2 years ago, 3 years ago, when EU has their active aging year, 2012, it was called Active Aging and Intergenerational Solidarity. So in the international field front, intergenerational as a field, approach as a field is growing. So the broad, and we do have as a group, the International Consortium for Intergenerational Programs do come together once in a few years for conferences. The most recent was last year when we had the conference in Hawaii. And so it started very much with this whole ideas of, okay, there's generation gap, there is generational conflict, so we have to do something. So it started from the American scholars started to look at, okay, we need to have more intervention. So what kind of intergenerational programs that we can have so that we can promote more chances and opportunities for old and young to get together. So that's why the intergenerational field, I would say, starts very much with this whole idea of intergenerational programming and initiatives. This is the broad definition here, to look at it as social vehicles. You know, when we look at intergenerational intervention and programs, they are social vehicles that create purposeful and ongoing exchange of resources and learning among older and younger generations. So you can see that older persons as resource is very much the framework that is working on. And this older persons as resource framework, we have already seen it back in 2002 in the Second World Assembly on Aging in Madrid statement, that when you look at aging, and you're really calling for more kinds of initiatives to promote mutual productive exchange between the generation and focusing on older persons as societal resource. So what are the benefits then, you know, to bring generations together? So these are just a list of benefits that you can look at, that we all, I suppose we will all know in one way or another. I think Professor, the keynote speaker today talked about sociable seniors, which I think is a really nice term. We talk about how the program is actually contributing to having, you know, so that seniors can be more sociable. And this idea of sociable seniors, I think, is something that will be very important when you look at the benefits of intergenerational programs for older people. But I would like to say that when we look at older people and intergenerational programs, it's not just for active older people, because I have seen many cases of older people in wheelchairs, even older people who are bedridden. They can also be part of this kind of intergenerational initiatives, because they can still bring some kind of interaction, some kind of knowledge and some kind of sharing with the younger generations if they are well planned. And then there are also much of a, you know, with more of a talk of community, kampong spirits, kampong ideas nowadays, we do see also quite a lot of different kind of benefits that we could have to the community when we bring intergenerations together. So this picture is from the Tampines 3-in-1 center that have daycare for older people as well as childcare centers, and the children and the community people, they always come together in the morning for exercises in that, what Kingwa would say, the creative aging kind of space. So what are the ways to categorize this kind of intergenerational work? So there are three. The first, the left side is more of the traditional way of we look at it. You know, how do you work within that framework to look at intergenerational kind of approaches? So one is the direction of service. You know, you look at whether it's the children serving the older people, for example, kindergarten kids, you know, going to old folks' home and sing songs and performance, or older people providing service for children, like you see in RSVP programs, senior mentor programs, and so forth, or the kind of communities kind of services that you see young and old working together. So those are the very traditional way of defining. But later on, Matt Kaplan, who is an expert, very well-known expert in this area, was looking at we should look more into the depth of engagement. You know, just putting them together, they may not really be engaging with each other. So how can we look at it from the depth of engagement scales, whether it's events, something that's one-time, seasonal, something that's more regular, what kind of programs they are they ongoing, are they just pilot? You know, in Singapore as well, we sometimes have a lot of programs that go on because there is funding. Then the funding goes off, and that's the end of the program, although it's very useful. So how can we make it sustainable? And then most important is, the ideal goal is actually how does it become a way of life, creating a setting with environment policies that would support continuously the intergenerational integration. So this is the kind of a continuum that Kaplan has come about. So you could look at a program and say, how do I want to, you know, what kind of program, what kind of, how much of this engagement I want to have. So of course the idea is that of creating intergenerational community settings at the end. So these are some of the examples of the different kinds of programs. I think there are about, if you look at 5, there are about 5 to 6 because they are pilot projects. Some of them are ongoing intergenerational programs. So things like intergenerational bonding, National Week, those are like events to bring out this awareness. So there's maybe about 3 or 4 in the scale. And then this is the RSVP program. They have a range of very good programs to engage with young people as senior mentors and so forth. And this is the 3-in-1 Tampines Center that I showed you earlier. They do have regular programs where children would link up with the older people for, you know, learning from the old about how to make your dumplings or mooncakes and so forth. And then this is a program from Presbyterian Community Service where the drop-in centers do have a lot of chances of visits from young people in the surrounding schools and really make the center very much more vibrant. Okay, and these are examples, I think we'll see that a lot of kindergarten kids going to interact with older people. And intergenerational programs that C3A is working on that has a really very good impact, encouraging a lot of learning, ground-up learning plans. And this is one of it that my students have done. They decided that my university students have decided to come up with a program to help older people to teach them how to use handphones. So that was a program that we did on a university campus for 4 weeks. Okay, so this is just some pointers for community, for services who think that they are interested in starting a new program. We always think that starting a new program is easy, but you know, just bring the old and young together. But I think there are a lot more things that we need to be aware of. The training of the coordinators or the person that's taking care in a childcare and elderly centers are very important because they must really have the passion to keep it going in the first place. But for those of you, I know there are a lot of community activists out here. So if you're interested in in starting a program, it's really important to really scan your neighborhood, look at what's around you, because there are a lot of elderly centers that are not so far away from childcare centers for kindergartens. So how can some kind of collaboration, some kind of activities on the community levels be possible? And that's important also in promoting that kind of friendly community, because as you know each other, as the children knows the older people, and when they walk in the street, in the supermarkets or in the markets, then they can tell their parents, oh, this is the older grandpa or grandma that I visit in the daycare center the other day. Okay, so the third approach that I'm going to introduce is more related to environment. I call it intergenerational contact zone. To look at it as a public space, how can we build or expand more of public space that are co-located where generations can meet? So sometimes you may think, okay, we're already talking about age-friendly space, we're already talking about community, so is this a redundancy, talking about intergenerational contact zone? I think it's very important that we have to bring the intergenerational emphasis out, because we always think that this space is for public. But if you take a close look, it actually becomes enclosed for certain area only. So we should try to, look at how we can have more, or promote more spaces that are friendly to different generations. And of course, we have to bear in mind that all this meeting of different age groups doesn't mean that it's going to be a harmony. There's going to be, actually a lot of times there will be conflicts. And so it is a place where you have to work out your conflicts so that you can promote mutual understanding for generational connections. I have here the playground. In Singapore, our playground are becoming 3G in the sense that you have children's playground, you have elderly exercise stations, you have also stations for people who wants to practice for IPPT. So, this, and I actually had a paper out that looked at how people, connect or interact here. So ICZ is a concept that those of us in the intergeneration fields, we're just picking it up and we're just looking at how to look at it as another framework that we can better understand what we are doing and incorporate it, not just intergenerational programs, but environment into that whole idea of intergenerational approach. So recently, my colleagues, Matt Kaplan and I, and a few of us from different countries have come together to do a compendium of intergenerational contact zone, and it just went online the other day. So I didn't have a chance to put the thing on, but let me know if you're interested. I'll send you the link. So those are those examples of what kind of ICZ that can be education, intergenerational learning, can be age-integrated childcare, facility, shared sites, can be playground, shopping centers. I think food will be a good nexus, as King Hua has said. And then also this kind of creative community spaces that are also, King Hua has talked about. It's also very interesting kind of ICZ that is naturally formed. Okay, just go on quickly to tell you that how it's important to create opportunities for informal interaction, and what are the ways you can do it. Open space invites gatherings. What can we do with the open space or transition space? Waiting areas, how can we make waiting areas into some kind of ICZ spaces? And then this is the Kotoen is a very interesting age-integrated center in Tokyo that some of us from PCS have visited in March. So they have spaces that for children on the other side, on the right side is the childcare centers. Children will be playing there, and on the left side, this space is actually, they have rehab and others. So it's an open space. People, elderly who come for rehab, in fact, are listening to the laughters and seeing the children play and so forth, and they have interactions very regularly. So besides environment, you also need to look into design. How do you have design that brings the generation together? So this is one example in Sweden, in Finland, where the researchers are trying to explore, how can we have playgrounds that older people can also play? You can have a playground that's for intergenerational, for multi-generationals as well. So then this is an example. If you want to have a nursing home together with a childcare center, how do you put them together in dining? So this is one of the examples of having children to be in the table with you as well. Okay, so the following are just 2 slides. I'll just go very fast. That there is a new center that's coming out in Singapore. They're going to have to build like a 200-bed nursing home together with maybe 50 or 100 kids childcare center. So they asked me to talk to them, and these are 2 slides that I show them. If you want to, what is an IG environment? You really have to design with the question of, can the space be an ICZ? Can it be space that promote intergenerational connections, and it has to be purpose-built sometimes. So how do you use design? Dining areas is one, playroom areas, even toilets. How can a toilet be both useful for wheelchair and for children? And then for some of the conditions for a successful intergenerational kind of, big intergenerational initiatives, of course you need the physical environment. You need really very much a stakeholder's commitment towards IG. And then also the community support and endorsement. And just the last slide here, conclusion, I think we are, in Singapore, I think by talking about kampong, building up the second theme of the successful aging plan, I think we are moving on in an exciting time. But we really need to look into how do you expand that intergenerational contact zone in the public space, together with creative space, together with transformative aging. And then to look into how you promote generational understanding and cooperation in different ways. What kinds of, how do you bridge IT divides, and how do you have more schools, for example, to be involved, to include in the school curriculum some form of learning about aging. And then we need to professionalize the coordinators who are in intergenerational programs. So you can co-locate, you can have 10 co-locations. You may not really have much of an interaction going on unless you have the right software that is in place. And then finally, I think it is very important for us to have an intergenerational thinking in policy making, so that we are very consciously including different generations whenever we plan an environment plan and program. Thank you very much.
All 3 speakers, AAA, have had equal time, 20 minutes each. Now, you have the time. But you remember, every minute you spend here is 1 minute away from lunch. So I invite questions. Just give us your name and your affiliation. And then ask your question. If you like to say to whom you want to put the question, please say so. Questions? Prof. Kwa.
Thank you. I want to thank all the 3 speakers. Excellent presentation. We wonder, there are many programs, as Ling Ling mentioned. Is there any study that tells you that the outcome of this kind of program? We have a lot of output. We can have 10 programs, 50 programs. Is there a way to evaluate which program is better? Like in the same way as done for the DPP, people want to do the evaluation with outcome.
Yeah, there are actually all the benefits when I talk about, all of them have some studies that validated that it's that the extent of its benefits to different generations and so forth. One of it, dementia, in fact, there are a few studies who look at the intergenerational programs between demential older people and young kids in Japan, in Australia, I remember, and in some other, and in the US also, I'm sure. So there are all kinds of studies that are being done on them. Not in Singapore though, so we have something to do together.
Next question. You're very hungry. Let me put a question to the three speakers. In cities, it gives me, I have the impression that there is a tendency to do two things. One is to warehouse old people and put them in nursing homes. And two is to try to banish the dying to hospices. I'm sure there are good reasons and good motives. But when we speak about a kampong for all ages, in the kampong, people live, they age, and they die in the community. So looking at Singapore, we are a city, we have a rapidly aging population, and most of us live in HDB estates. Are there any plans or thinking about how to enable the aged to continue to age in place, and to come to the end of their lives in place, in the estates, for example? Prof. Fang?
I'm not aware of any specific plans, but there is certainly the model that is sustainable in the long term. From different reasons, firstly, in terms of the skilled manpower for providing care, I think we are facing a shortage overall in different kind of sectors, and the healthcare sector is one of the sectors facing this problem. In Japan, for instance, there are cases where there are places where the elderly are supervised by skilled nurses, but augmented by 2 times as many community volunteers. So I think that would be probably the more sustainable way of looking at long-term care. And some of we have a lot of homemakers who, between marketing in the morning and cooking in the evening, spare a few hours, and they can help to look after the elderly. And we can train our domestic helper to do the same thing in a certain way. I think, in fact, there are already some programs talking about that. So I think the approach is very much an integration of the software, the organizational aspect, as well as the design and the planning of the estate. But at the moment, I don't think there's any estate that is initiated as to combine these two aspects. I think King Wah talked about aging in community. I think, to me, the term is community aging in place. That covers the 3 aspects. The social aspect, which is community, aging, which is the biomedical aspect, and place, which is the environment. So I think that would probably encompass, as a concept, a more viable kind of long-term solution. Yeah.
Dr. Chong?
Maybe just to add, I think that's precisely what we are trying to promote in terms of aging, not aging in place. I mean, aging in place is important, but the other aspect is aging friendly, because everyone ages. So it's not just those who are older is getting older. Everyone of us age, right? So the environment should be designed to allow us to age from 20 to 30 years old, from 30 years old to 40 years old, to from 50 to 100. So if you can actually allow that, you can actually live, entire life within a place. Or another concept that has been brought up is also aging everywhere. I'm not sure whether you heard of this concept where the new generation of seniors actually like to travel. I'm sure all of us like to travel. So they would like to actually travel and stay in different places, and when they are still mobile, and then maybe when they are more dependent, or I would say we will try to make it such that they are more interdependent, because they can actually take care of each other within the community. So I do agree that place is important. I don't mean to actually substitute place with community. I think both the hardware and software is important to make the place a lifelong, facilitate a lifelong journey for the person. Yeah.
Anthropologist?
I think in Singapore, what the policymakers are trying to do is really to have more nursing homes in the community. That's why we have a lot of NIMBY issues, right, that's going on. So you're building big, multi-story nursing homes that's next to a housing estate. So in fact, the one that I'm working with is going to build like an 8 or 10-story, 200-bedded nursing home, but it's actually very close to like the HDB blocks next to it. So I don't know what kind of reactions you would draw from the community. But I think we also have to be very aware that we don't end up bringing people to that kind of mindset that, oh, if your parents are old, they have to go nursing home. I think that's really terrible. So it should be seen as an option. And then we also need to make nursing home a lot more community open to community and be very friendly and be somewhere that community can, nursing home should have gathering space for community and so forth, so that people can, you don't see older people as locked away and nobody cares. In Japan, we just came back from a study trip in Japan, and one of the interesting things was when we had like community activities, like the residents get together, for some community activities for older people in like a place like community center. They actually bring in older residents from nursing home in the community to join them. So the residents from nursing home come out from their nursing home and join the people in the community for activities on a regular basis. So I think these are things we need to really have to keep in mind of that it shouldn't be an institution if we are really building more nursing homes in Singapore.
So maybe nursing homes should be built in the HDB estates. Any other questions?
Can I
okay.
Just
Prof. Fang.
augment that
yes.
Remark? I think the traditional model is nursing home is essentially derived from acute hospital ward model, which is very much a pool model, where you pool all the customers or however you define them, the user, into a concentrated space. And the advantage of that, of course, is efficiency. I think there will continue to be a place for nursing home because of some people will really need the kind of high dependent kind of care. But a more viable model, to my mind, is to decentralize some of these nursing homes. Because the typical nursing home pools the user base from maybe 2-3 kilometers away. But if you are able to decentralize that into what I call nursing center within the neighborhood, right? Maybe just 50 beds, and then you just have a much lower number of skilled workers, supplemented by a lot of community workers, right? Okay. Your neighbors who are looking after you. I think that's very important. I'm sure for us who have elderly parents, you probably do not mind a neighbor looking after your elderly parent, rather than having to put them in the nursing home that is a few kilometers away. So I think that makes a big difference. The kind of proximity between the elderly and the community is a very important factor.
Can I just add a quick remark? Just give an example, because recently we work with NTUC Health, and we also understand the idea of NIMBY syndrome, which is very hard to break. So the center that we design is not just a healthcare center, but it's a social hub, it's a commercial hub, and it's also a wellness hub. So it encompasses all kinds of dimensions that is not just catered for the elderly. In fact, anybody can just come in. And the location is such that it's actually in between the very busy junction with the bus stop and behind is a coffee shop. So I advise them, and also we design such that both the front door and back door is always open, so that the people, anybody, can just cut through the center during the whole day. So there'll be a lot of community that pass by this center, sit down, have a sip of coffee, free coffee anyway, provided by NTUC. And then they can actually chit-chat with the elderly, and then they build a community from there. And the seniors actually come down every day. Because we designed a planter such that they can actually bring their own plants and sit in a planter next to their neighbor's plant that they compare, and then they keep compete. So it become a new community kind of activity for them to activate, for them to come together. So I think there's a lot of things that design can come in to get away with the NIMBY syndrome and turn all this healthcare facility into a community design. Thanks.
Okay, I also want to say one thing. So now they compare plants and not compare birds. Just one last thing to share is that when we were in Japan recently, there's this, we visited this small place. In Japan now, there's so much into unit care. Like you have 9 people in one unit. So all the dementia homes are all in unit care and very small. Like you can have just 9 people, you can form a nursing home already for dementia. So this one we went have 3 units. So that means 9 times 3, 27 older people with dementia care needs. And then they also have a childcare center together with them. So the childcare center, I think, can take up to 20 maybe. Now they are just open for a couple of years, so they have about 10 or so kids. But if no other community, kids come in, at least there will be the kids of the staff that will be there for childcare. So I think that's a very good concept that we could actually think about. So when I tell people, like in Singapore, we're going to build big, a lot of baited nursing homes, they say, oh, this is something that we have done in the past. We have moved on to look at community, small, unique kind of care. So I think this is probably something we need to move on as time goes by.
On behalf of the Gerontological Society, a souvenir for each of our speakers. Now, on to pleasure, lunch, but from the organizers.
Thank you, Dr. Chiang, and our panel of speakers who have done very well in time management. In fact, I'm very proud that we actually managed to catch up on our time. So lunch is next on our agenda. So I'd like to invite Lawrence to come and chair the next symposium. Lawrence, please.
Thank you, Alice. I trust you all had a very good lunch. And one thing with good lunch, you feel sleepy. You ask Prof. Goligan, who tells you too much sugar too much sugar. I hope you all keep awake for the second half of this conference. This is Symposium 3. And the main topic is management of dementia in the community. Our first speaker is Dr. Chris Soy, a consultant psychiatrist. He has early psychiatric training in Hong Kong, and later he practiced in UK, Nottingham. And his research interest is in dementia and depression in the elderly. He highlighted that the main thing in the assessment of dementia at the primary level is the bottleneck of dementia, And it is very important to make the right diagnosis. And to this end, we know there's a shortage of specialists, and he has in mind the training of family physicians so as to share the pool of expertise in the detection of dementia and also into uncomplicated Alzheimer's disease. He also talks about the concept of shared care clinic approach, which instead of waiting for more specialists to come, he will give us more on this. Dr. Chris Soy, please. A big hand to him.
Hi, a very good afternoon to all of you. So welcome here today. Today, actually, I'm going to share with you some personal experience working with primary care to solve the difficult problem of dementia together. So, I use this then? No worries. So, first maybe I start with, why should we treat dementia? So from this slide actually is telling you something about dementia, the end point of it. If you know the end point, you will know why is it so urgent for us to start early. This slide actually tells you the reason why patients go to OH home if they suffer from dementia. As you can see from the slide, most of them with behavioral and psychological problems, family cannot cope. Then the second reason will be delusion, caregiver stress. The reason why I mention it here now is, if you can prevent those problems from happening later on, the best way is to make an early diagnosis. When you know the problem early and start to tackle it early, then more likely the patient can stay happily at home and age well. So these are the reasons. Of course, if the caregiver passes away, there's no other option. You can see how stressful it has been looking after dementia patients. This is another paradigm we need to notice why we need to diagnose dementia early. I think it's quite familiar to you. If you treat the patient early with anti-dementia drug, the degree the patient can benefit with maintained good function in community will be better. So you can see the curve, and the blue shaded area is actually the benefit you can see. If you start the treatment with anti-dementia drug early, they actually can function better and well at home longer. Of course, if you start the medication later, the effect is still there, but will be in a lesser magnitude. And that's the second reason why we need to diagnose dementia early and help them early from easy phase. Of course, other social and economic problem would be if the patients still have capacity, you diagnose them already, there are many things in this country can be done. One of the examples is LPA, lasting power of attorney. If the patient still can recognize their family, despite they don't have ability to manage their own money, own housing, they can still assign their loved one to help them. And you lose the chance once the diagnosis has been made too late, when you're just fighting with incontinence or disability. And that's the second reason why we have to deal with it. Diagnose it earlier. So one of the examples I have is the first consultation I have at my specialist clinic is to arrange for OH home. So you can see, because of the poor awareness and the difficult and late diagnosis, patients tend to present late and not much could be done. And that's the reason why we need to approach the problem earlier. So we start the journey. I think Prof has seen this slide already. He asked me who is me. Actually, I think not Tom Cruise anyway. So this one is, so what we have been doing is I met a friend, Yehudi, at Choa Chu Kang Polyclinic. We both felt something could be done. It's very, very experimental, I would say. So in some way, he was persuaded by me that, okay, let's start something. We can help the dementia patient by treating the discharge one from NUH. So those I have managed already, I discharge to you to manage. He's happy with that. Then we start the clinic, but it was a bit boring because most of the thing has been done. Then I persuade him, tempt him a bit more. Why not we start diagnosing new cases? He said, oh, not a bad idea. I could try, but should not be too many, by the way. So we only run the clinic once every 4 nights because he wants to make sure it's well controlled. It's a very good Singaporean way of starting new things. So we start diagnosing cases as well. So that's how it started. But amazingly, he's very interested in diagnosing dementia. After around 3 months' time, he himself finds diagnosing is not that difficult. Because if you go back to the diagnostic criteria of ICD-10 or DSM-5, the recent ones, this is more complex now. It could be simplified. As long as there's a progressive deterioration in cognitive function for a reasonable period of time, it's already dementia. So he mastered the skill just around 3 months' time, how to diagnose. Then, after half year, he developed a template. So we have seen cases together like this. As you can see, what he wanted to do as a GP, I'm not praising myself, is he himself coming up with this. And of course, I agree with him, this is the right template. We go through the memory. We go through how's the cognitive function changed. Still using the DSM-3 criteria here because NHG is using DSM-3 now, so I can't go away from it. So despite we are now using DSM-5. So that's why we still ask for apraxia, aphasia, anoxia. Then after this, we'll go to whether any BPSD, that means any behavioral problem. So depression, hallucination. I emphasize on this. If you still remember the first slide, those are the main reasons why family give up. Yeah, so we put it forefront here. Then the safety issue, whether the patient can, no problem in cooking, whether they lost their way before, whether they have been wandering, throwing things, those risky things, we have to go through. Then we also ask about LPA, whether they need it or not, and then bowel, bladder function, sleep, and appetite. So you see, a very comprehensive schedule, making diagnosis, identifying risk in one go. So we developed this together, mainly by him, after 6 months' time. Then this is the investigation we came up with. So the most important two, if you forgot everything, is actually B12 folates and thyroid function. The rest, of course, we are doing all this at the polyclinic as well. But due to limited resources, we can't do all cases with CT brain. We understand this constraint. So that also actually gives us some hints that we should focus on very straightforward, simple Alzheimer's disease. This is the tips for myself. If I want to develop something successful, I should not be too greedy. For somebody who develops things, like a day hospital, they have several ideas at the same time, is usually going to fail. So I focus to Yohodi, let's treat the simple Alzheimer's disease. Actually, that would consist of around 60 to 70% of cases. Why not? So we got this consensus, then the clinic continued to grow. So this is what happened after 1 year of operating. So the first case was, we discovered one brain tumor. By his clinical skill, we referred that case rightly to hospital, and it turned out to be a brain tumor. We actually we also have cases of vascular component also, we noticed, and refer to specialists. Vascular components means this case is not purely Alzheimer's, but got some risk factor of stroke. We can see, like loss of function. We also referred several cases to my team, G-Rays, managing the BPSD, the behavioral issues. We believe this kind of collaboration has helped several, rescuing them not going to age home. Initially, the family planned to go to age home. But since the service is collaboration with me, we could go in quickly and help the family. And then we noticed the demand is very high. Despite we aim at just keeping Alzheimer's disease, it's not good enough. We need to do something. So the first thing we have done is to change from fortnightly, every 2 weeks, to weekly. So we have to increase our capacity because demand is so high. And then the waiting time after doing that for a few months still is 3 months' time. The patient is still willing to come to see us because it's at their doorstep. At the Choa Chu Kang region, they still like to come here. It's simple for them. This is, of course, also related to the health culture of Singapore. People like to have their problem treated at polyclinics. So then we start to do something after 1.5 years. We decided routine cases, which we have settled already, make diagnosis already, should be seen by the general pool. That means other doctors at Choa Chu Kang should help us to see those cases, to create space so that we can see the new cases. So the journey carry on. It's very interesting because when you see a problem, you tackle it, then a new problem comes, you tackle it, and carry on like this. So interesting. So that's how it happened. We also train the doctors and nurses there so that not just Yohodi, but other doctors also know how to make diagnosis, how the nurses know how to do MMSE, simple tests for our patients. So it went very well. So after 2 years, cases were followed by the general pool, quite a lot of them. And then we also involved social worker. You know why? Because when firstly diagnosed the case, The social worker need to give a lot of input on how to face stress by the relative, how to get resources from community. And so we have social worker colleagues standing by in case we diagnose a case with social complex problem, we can refer there. So that was an interesting experience. So we managed to cut short the waiting time from 3 months to 2 months at the end. But still, we still have slot fully filled most of the time. So we aim at involving the whole clinic to be involved. So this was our plan. Firstly, we set the right criteria. If there's any other specialist complicated problem, we'll refer out. We only retain simple cases. We teach our colleagues at Choa Chu Kang. We give them repeated talk, tell them what are our diagnostic criteria. Please don't refer other kind of cases, but just refer to those. And then, beside this, we tell them our limitation. The time is short. That's why when you refer, we ask the doctors to do the blood tests, to do the ECG test. Why? Because when you do an ECG, you will know whether straight away this patient can take anticholinesterase inhibitor or not. So everything has been cut short. Then we also follow up cases only once a year with us. The rest, they know how to manage. We teach them how to manage. So by doing that, the whole polyclinic has been helping us to manage dementia cases, either referring or helping us to carry on giving the medication and give us space to manage difficult cases. Social worker also has been involved. So this is the workflow. I'm not going to elaborate because of limitation of time. Developed by themselves, not by me. You can see how good primary care doctors are. When you give them a task, they handle it, they develop their proper workflow. And it has been running now 3 years without problem. So these are the outcome of cases. You can see most of them are really, as we wish, diagnosed with dementia, 53%. Roughly around 8%, we notice they are MCI cases, but we don't want these kind of cases. We refer them to specialist clinic because they might need legal problems, they might need neuropsychological tests we don't have. 8% anxiety, 3% with depression. Since I was there, I also treat this, but I will advise if another clinic have this problem, could refer up also. But still, you got 50% cases to manage. So 2% we refer straight away to tertiary hospital on the first consult. And 27% of cases were normal. Quite a lot of anxiety ones with worrying about themselves having dementia. So this outcome, actually you can see more graphical data. So for the 3 years, you can see, not surprisingly, most of the patients are females because males live shorter. Sorry for that. And then this is the cumulative number of our internal referral. You can see initially they took cases from NUH, but gradually the percentage goes down, and most of the cases were referred by themselves. So this is how the process has been going on. Then this is cumulative patients' attendance. You can see we have been growing in numbers. Initially, the number of visits were proportion were repeated visits, around 20 of them. Only 23 were first visit. But quickly, we changed that. We have more, the proportion actually has maintained quite similar throughout. It's very difficult. If you run a memory clinic yourself, you will realize most of the slots will be blotted by repeat visits. You won't have too many first visits. But I maintain that because my aim is to use this clinic to serve the public. The more being diagnosed, the better. So this has been the result of the whole team's work. I think that's it. That's what I want to tell you. So it's possible, you see. as long as you have hope in people, you let them do things, give them the right direction, they will grow. Done. So could have, because I'm going to that clinic, it starts at 2 o'clock, but I think this is an important meeting. I must come because Prof. Pai invite me, he's my mentor. So, but I would be happy if there's any one question. Please feel free to ask. Any question? Okay, I think you are the most knowledgeable group. Thanks a lot for your attention. Thank you very much.
Dr. Soy, good that is no question, because it's a very insightful presentation inside the workings of his clinic. He's rushing off to man the clinic, I think shortage of staff. Chris, on behalf, one more time, give him a big hand. Our second speaker is Dr. Iris Rother. I just asked her how to pronounce it. She said Rother. She is speaking on G-race domiciliary visits. I thought it was Grand Prix race at the first reading. And on the domiciliary visit side, is as a model of care. Dr. Rother will tell us more. She has pursued a clinical and research fellowship at the Geriatric Psychiatry at the University of British Columbia. Her research interest is in neuro, cognitive disorder, and prevention. Dr. Iris, please.
A very good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm afraid I'm a bit of a bearer of bad news, despite the theme of the conference being good news of aging. Up until the earlier speaker, everything has been about prevention of dementia and early detection of dementia. But what I'm talking about today is G-race home visits, and that's really about what we do with patients who already have been diagnosed at probably the moderate to late stage, and how we support them in the community. So the first part of my talk will be about what we do at these home visits. The second part will be the results that we have had in terms of the progress that we have made with these patients, and finally some reflections that we have. So this is a painting. It's a celebrated work by Sir Luke Fildes from 1887. It's titled The Doctor, and it basically depicts a Victorian general practitioner who is conducting a home visit. And it's come to be widely associated with portraying the good qualities of a doctor as well as patient-centeredness. And why am I showing you this? Well, basically, I just want to highlight that there is a very long history of home visits in clinical medicine. And in fact, up until the 1940s, majority of doctors in America and Britain spend the majority of their time on the roads in horses and buggies, traveling from home to home, visiting patients' homes. And unfortunately, there was a precipitous decline in its popularity in the 1980s and 90s, mainly because there were concerns about whether it was cost-effective, about practitioner safety, about how it took so much time, and how few patients you could see at one particular time. Moving forward, progressing 100 years from Sir Fildes's painting in 1887, we have progressed from horses and buggies to taxis as our preferred mode of transport from home to home. And we see a resurgence of the need for home care. And as has been mentioned already, this is really because there is a rapidly aging population. And with that, I think our outpatient services will not be able to meet the need of everyone, in particular patients who have severe disruptive problems, behavioral problems, as well as mobility problems that will make a clinic visit highly impractical. So with that background in mind, the earlier speaker, Dr. Chris Soy, our leader, established the service, the Geriatric Psychiatry Outreach Assessment, Consultation and Enablement Program. In short, it's GRACE, or GRACE. And one arm of this service is the GRACE Home Clinic Service, which is essentially doctors performing a house call for patients who are homebound. And the aims of this service were to improve access to patients who would not otherwise be able to come to the clinic, to reduce caregiver stress, to improve quality of life, and reduce the number of hospitalizations. So this service adopts a multidisciplinary approach with a psychogeriatrician leading, i.e. Dr. Soy and Dr. Emily Ho. And we also have residents in training who rotate through our service. Case managers, occupational therapists, and psychologists bring a unique skill set to the team such that we are able to tailor-make individualized care plans for each patient. We convene weekly to discuss new referrals, and our inclusion criteria for the GRACE Home Clinic is that of individuals who are above 65 years old, those who have mental health problems, those who are homebound, and those who live in the western region of Singapore, as we have sister partners elsewhere in the island. And part of the importance of these meetings, apart from triaging the referrals, is also to ensure that very careful, comprehensive plans are made for each individual patient, and also to provide peer support for the members of the team. So quickly moving on to the actual home visit, there are 3 focal points of each home visit, namely the patient, the caregiver, as well as the environment, and seeing how each of these interact with the other. The home visit affords us a lot of meaningful observations that can be made that cannot otherwise be made in a clinic setting. You see a patient and their family in their natural environment, you see how they interact, and very often it's very insightful. So during these visits, we would assess the patient. We would talk to them, evaluate their mental health and their physical health, do a physical examination, and sometimes we would even assess how they perform specific tasks in the home setting. One of the areas that you may not necessarily get to evaluate very much in the clinic setting is that elderly patients are often on a whole long list of medication, and sometimes it's difficult to, in the clinic setting, actually identify what they are taking, what they are not taking, whether there's an issue of expired medication being taken. So in the home setting, our case managers and the doctors who go down can actually see this, directly observe this, make sure that the medication is being taken, not too little, not too much, and that it's packed adequately. Of course, during the visit, we also prescribe medications to the patients if necessary. An interesting part of what we do during these visits are also activity scheduling. Depending on the cognitive level and the diagnosis of the elderly individual, we would bring along certain activities ranging from jigsaw puzzles, memory games, reminiscence activities, or simple sorting activities for certain patients who may be at a later stage of their dementia. And those who are extremely advanced, we may bring more sensory activities that utilizes different textures and employs their sense of touch, so such as the sensory pillow over here. The home visit also affords us the option and, well, the opportunity really to observe the environment, both external to the home, see what amenities are nearby, as well as inside the home. Very often we need to identify if there are any obstacles or arrangements that may potentially jeopardize the safety of the elderly. So on just general observation, for example, if it's a hoarder, you would see that the house may look something like this. And it's very, very cluttered, very difficult to maneuver through from room to room. If it's a patient with, for example, a delusional disorder, one patient had 10 locks for the entire main door. So that gives you a flavor and a sense of what's happening. Of course, very important, we need to prevent falls. And so we ensure that in the home, the necessary fixtures are in place, such as grab bars, non-slip towels, and non-slip mats. And finally, as part of the home visit, we also get to interact with the caregivers, see how they interact with the patient, the frequency and quality of support. We may need to train domestic helpers as well and provide support. I won't go very much into this because Dr. Emily Ho, the next speaker, will be talking a lot more about how we can prevent caregiver burnout and stress and what we do. Quickly moving on to the good news now. So with regard to the outcomes of our service it's been established for slightly over 3+ years, but it's still a work in progress in terms of churning out the results. I'm only highlighting a small portion of the results, those from the home clinic arm, which is where the doctors go down with the case managers to see the patient, and as such is a lot smaller subset. We actually have a much larger sample of up to approximately 400 patients, but we're still trying to analyze those results, and I hope to share them with you soon. So for the home clinic, as you can see, the mean age of participants was 78.6 years. We had a majority of female patients at 56.7%, predominantly Chinese distribution as well, 76.1%, and the majority of them were either married or widowed. And as you saw also in earlier presentations this morning, in general, the majority of our elderly patients have no formal education. The bulk of our patients are dementia patients. 59.7% of our load for the G-Rays home clinic have a diagnosis of dementia, and this predominantly would be Alzheimer's dementia, but there are other types of dementia such as vascular dementia and frontotemporal dementia. The rest of the diagnosis would spread across depression, psychosis, and some others such as adjustment disorder or somatoform disorders. So with that in mind, knowing that the bulk of our patients are really dementia patients, it's not surprising to me that there wasn't any improvement in the cognition. In fact, it maintained quite static at, this is a rating scale that measures cognition. It's called the Mini Mental State Examination. So the drop was from about 17 to 16, but this was not statistically significant. On a scale that measured functioning, the Barthel's index, there was a drop as well from 53 to 43 upon 100 across 1 year. But again, this didn't achieve statistical significance, and it wasn't unexpected given that the bulk of our patients were suffering from dementia. What was interesting is that we were able to demonstrate a reduction in depressive symptomatology from baseline to 1 year, with reduction, as you can see, from about 9+ all the way down to just below 3. But to me, the most interesting result and what really encapsulates the hard work that our case managers do is this particular slide. Here, what I'm showing is the neuropsychiatric inventory. What it does is it captures the spread of behavioral problems across several domains. So symptoms such as delusions, hallucinations, apathy, and agitation. The symptoms that, as Dr. Soy mentioned earlier, really cause caregivers quite a lot of stress. This is what this scale captures. And so the blue line shows you the degree of the BPSD, the behavioral problems, and the orange line shows you the distress that the caregiver experiences specific to these behavioral problems. And as you can see, from baseline to 1 year, there is a significant reduction at all time points, and it was extremely significant at p less than 0.001 at 1 year. And this was accompanied by a reduction in the distress that the caregivers experienced as well across 1 year. And so this really is a very important result for us. It encourages us to know that the approaches that we work, whether it's drug or non-drug approaches, help to reduce the level of behaviors, even in the home setting, and it reduces the stress that families experience because of these behaviors. Other scales that we administer at regular intervals include a visual analog scale, which assesses the patient's self-rated health. So this is what we show them. From a worst imaginable health state at 0 to a best imaginable health state at 100, how they feel at that particular time point. And while it did not achieve statistical significance, we were able to show that it was gradually creeping up from slightly below 70 to around 80 in the entire sample of close to 70 patients. We also administer client satisfaction questionnaires just to evaluate how happy the caregivers are with the service, and this was maintained at a high level. It's upon a maximum of 32, and we were able to maintain 29 to 30.5 across the time points. And we were also able to reduce the number of hospitalizations across time points from 4 to 1. So overall, I would say that the clinical outcomes are very positive. We were able to maintain quality of life in our elderly patients. We were able to maintain high levels of client satisfaction in those who were part of the G-Rays home clinic. And very significantly, both clinically as well as statistically, we were able to demonstrate a reduction in depressive symptomatology, the behavioral symptoms associated with dementia, as well as the caregiver stress associated with these behaviors. However, even though we have demonstrated that, past criticisms of domiciliary visits services have included the fact that it's not cost-effective. And with that in mind, we're actually looking towards, with the entire sample, of course, economic analysis, and we're still in discussion with our public health colleagues as to how we can proceed to do this. So just very quickly, moving on to some of the reflections that we have had as a team, participating and having the privilege to visit patients in their own homes. I think, if you remember Dr. Johnson Pham's talk earlier this morning, he showed many neural connections and how complex each individual brain is. And similarly, as individuals, it really manifests in how unique and different we are. So behind every patient with dementia, there is always some unique individual with personal preferences, with a cultural background, with a past occupation that we need to appeal to. So their personal likes and dislikes are how we tailor-make our interventions. And we found that when we try to do that and appeal to that, the solutions often work the best. But nevertheless, there really is no one-size-fits-all solution. And I think the team as a whole, and especially the very dedicated case managers, have had to tap on their creativity very often to make sure that there are very targeted interventions for each individual. Some of the other reflections include the fact that sometimes in a outpatient setting, it can be, you can dish out lots of advice, but it may or may not be necessarily very realistic. However, when you're in the home setting, you would know what works and what doesn't work, and whether or not your suggestions are truly beneficial. So those are just some of the reflections that we would like to share. And finally, to acknowledge the very dedicated team under the leadership of Dr. Soy and Dr. Emily Ho. These are the case managers and administrative staff who are behind the results. So thank you very much. I made good time within 16 minutes.
Thank you, Dr. Aris, for your presentation. The last speaker, but not least, is Dr. Emily Ho. She's the Consultant Psychiatrist and Director of Clinical Services, Psychological Medicine Department. She's also the co-leader for G-Rays and also actively involved in psycho-geriatric and memory clinic. Topic is caregiver support for dementia patients. Today, the expectations of caregiver is much more demanding, leading to caregiver stress. Also, caregivers often neglect themselves, their own physical and mental, even their mental well-being. Not sure if it's a myth that caregivers go off earlier than the ones they cared for. So Dr. Emily will tell us more of this. Dr. Emily, please.
Thank you, Mr. Wee. Good afternoon, everyone. Yeah, I must say it's very enriching and interesting to hear from the different speakers this morning, ranging from scientists, researchers, to architects. And now we bring you the clinical part of the service. And it's really good to see how we can collaborate and work together in the future. So we've been talking a lot about the elderly with dementia, with depression. So let's shift our focus a little bit now to this very important group of people who should not be neglected. So they are the caregivers of the dementia patients. They have this overwhelming title and role given to them, the caregiver. But let's not forget that they are individuals like you and me, they have their own jobs, their fair share of the workload, their stress from the job, they have their own family. They are in a relationship, they have their own fair share of marital problems, stress with children, and last but not least, they might have their own health issues, be it from common health conditions like diabetes, hyperlipidemia, to heart problems, and we even see caregivers who are on dialysis themselves, who are also taking care of the elderly. And of course, not forgetting the mental health issues that the caregivers could be suffering from. We do see a proportion of caregivers with depression and even anxiety. So they themselves are struggling with their own health, they have their own appointments, their own medications, at the same time taking care of the elderly with dementia. So what exactly are our expectations for this group of a caregiver? Just looking down the list, whenever we see a patient in the clinic, we expect the caregiver to come in and we'll do a lot of psychoeducation, providing them with a lot of information. First, we tell them about the illness itself. We expect them to have knowledge of the dementia, what are the signs and symptoms they would expect, what they would see when the elderly progress through the different stages of dementia. And again, we do expect them to know how to provide for the physical needs of these elderly with dementia, ranging from the early stages when we do not overdo things for the elderly because we want to enable them, we want to promote independence in their activities of daily living. But at the same time, as the elderly progresses through the stages of dementia, that there would be more physical needs, and the caregiver would then be expected to know how to provide for these physical needs, from transfers of the patients to bathing to feeding of the elderly. And not forgetting providing for the emotional needs of the elderly patients as well, from the anxiety and depression of knowing that they have dementia, to coping with behavioral and psychological symptoms of dementia when the elderly gets restless, when the elderly gets agitated as well. So knowing what causes this behavior and how to manage them. Next, we expect them to know and to make use of the resources in the community. Because of the demands, we see that there are a lot of new resources, organizations that have developed in the community. As healthcare givers ourselves, we are struggling to keep up with these new names, new acronyms of CREST, COMMIT, and the names of many organizations. So again, these caregivers would have to know, not only know the presence of the resources, but how to engage these services as well. Next is about ensuring safety. In the previous talks, we talked about the safety of the elderly, how to ensure that they are safe in the home and in the community, about fire safety when they are left on the stove and forgetting to off, about wandering off, about falls in the community as well as falls in the home. So again, these are things that the caregiver would have to note about the safety of the environment. And already a very long list. And lastly, ensuring adherence to the treatment, making sure that the elderly takes their medications, come back regularly for appointments, and to recognize the side effects of these medications and have to report to the doctors during the appointments. Look like it's a very long and daunting list. Are we expecting a little bit too much from the caregivers? Despite our repeated psychoeducation, I don't think it's very easy for a caregiver to grasp all this information all at the same time. But what about the patients, the elderly with dementia? What do they exactly expect from their caregiver? Ultimately, it's a family member, it's a loved one. They expect their family to be there for them, to be a happy son, a happy daughter, a happy spouse. Okay, as we know that as dementia progresses, sometimes the elderly would not understand your language. Okay, they might not understand what you're trying to say, but they can recognize your tone of voice. They recognize your facial expression. They recognize your body language. And a distressed, angry, agitated caregiver, these feelings will be translated. The elderly would feel them, and they would feel the same way. So it's really very important to recognize the caregiver's stress and to see how we can help them. This is something that I would say a large group of caregivers do go through in the initial stages, and that is denial. Right? Despite our education to them at every visit, how our case managers have been telling them about the diagnosis of dementia, about the signs and symptoms, about what to expect, but often there's still this denial where they could not accept the diagnosis. And then we get repeated questions about, why is my father still not able to feed himself? Why is he still not recognizing me? And in many people, we see anger as well. Okay, they get angry with the elderly with dementia. There are a lot of elderly with dementias who are apathetic. They sit there, they do not engage in activities. And a lot of family members get very angry, all right? They are lazy, they refuse to do anything. That's why they end up in this state. And so there's a lot of anger in them. And as well as many family feels that, this is a purposeful behavior. They purposely do this to make things difficult for us. They just wouldn't listen. And how many caregivers themselves do suffer from depression and anxiety as well. And many of them face grief of the loss of their father or mother because they feel that they are not the same anymore. They are not the father that I know. They are not the mother that I know from before. And lastly, embarrassment. Right? Because of the different behaviors, the BPSD that was mentioned earlier, the behavioral and psychological symptoms of dementia, some caregivers actually face embarrassment when they bring the elderly loved ones out into the community, or even when they have friends and visitors to their home. For very simple reasons like, the elderly could make a mess when they are eating, they could wet their pants, some of them are socially inappropriate, as well as talking loudly, scolding vulgarities. And this has a great impact on a caregiver's social life. Many a times, they become socially isolated. And so, back to our service, G-Rays, other than what we do for the elderly, these are some things that through helping the elderly and helping the caregivers, we hope to make a difference. So firstly, psychoeducation, I've mentioned many times, and this is a continuous process because there is so much to learn about it. And it's important to emphasize to the caregivers that this behavior is caused by an organic brain disease, all right? It is an illness, and that the patient is not deliberately trying to be difficult, to be stubborn, or to be annoying. As well as teaching them to manage the behavioral and psychological symptoms of dementia through use of behavioral techniques like distraction, as well as some reminiscence therapy where they look at old photos, happy times together. And through these interventions, we hope that the caregivers spend quality time with the elderly. Caregiver support, it involves linking them up with the community resources as well. And lastly, on environmental modification that has been mentioned just now to ensure that the elderly stays in a safe environment, because if you have more falls and more complications, more hospital stays, this is going to be even more stressful for the caregivers. And of course, all these are not possible without the help of our community partners. So these are some of the community partners that we very frequently work with and has really helped a lot in helping the caregivers. Firstly, we have our CRESS partners, and that stands for the Community Resource Engagement and Support Team. We are currently working with NTUC CRESS as well as the Anglican Community Services, and they do provide a vital link between the elderly, their caregivers, and the mental health support systems. So we have a group of very complex patients with complex conditions. We do home visits by the G-Rays team, and once they are stabilized, we do hand them over to our CRESS partners who can help us support the caregivers. Secondly, elder sitter is one of very common services that's been engaged by the elderly. I must say there are two groups of patients. The first group whereby they could be very difficult to engage. The G-Rays team do try very hard to engage these patients to help prescribe a personalized activity schedule for them. And once they are more stabilized, we do hand over this group to the elder sitter. But again, there's another group whom they can liaise directly with the elder sitters for patients who are easier to engage. And through cognitive stimulation, they are able to interact and engage better. They also help to build the caregiver's capability to support and care for the elderly. And during this period, when the elder sitter is in the home, they do provide respite for the caregivers. The caregivers are able to run their errands, to have some time for themselves. Some of the other services include the interim care services as well. We do know that a lot of the families are quite dependent on the domestic helpers. And during change of domestic helpers, when they go back for holidays, that is when they feel very stressful. And that's where interim care services come in very timely to help. And others, as part of the environmental intervention, they are the EASE program as well, to enhance is an enhancement for the active seniors, the home improvement program, as well as how to tap on the seniors' mobility and enabling fund. There are a lot out there in the community. It's how we can help them to put things together and to engage these services. And perhaps this is one of the most important things that I must stress in planning ahead and be prepared. Just now, Dr. Chris Soy talked about making an LPA, that's the lasting power attorney. So while you have the capacity, we have to nominate a donee to help you make decisions on your personal welfare, on financial issues, when the day comes when you lose your capacity. So the caregiver who might be the donee would be prepared on what to expect, what are they expect to make decisions on when the day comes. This will reduce conflicts among the caregivers, reduce blame on each other. However, LPA is not the end to all. We have been trying very actively to ask our elderly to be engaged in advanced care planning as well. Okay. That is in making decisions to express their preferences and their wishes about end-of-life situations, about long-term care plans. I know it's always not easy to talk to elderly about dying, about issues surrounding death, but it is very important. Once they have talked about LPA, it makes things easier for them to consider what are their wishes, and then this can be expressed to the donee, and when the time comes again, the caregiver is prepared about what to expect, and that the decisions they made are actually the elderly's wishes. Okay, again, this reduces the self-blame, the guilt about maybe not making an appropriate decision, and the blame on each other in the family. And of course, part of this whole package is in making a will as well. So all about planning and getting prepared and knowing what to expect. So through these efforts, we do measure the caregiver's burden by measuring the Zerit scale. So at baseline, we do see mild to moderate caregiver stress in these patients, and in 3 months, 6 months, 1 year time, we can see a significant reduction. Oh, sorry. Sorry for that. Yeah, and so through 3 months, 6 months, and 1 year, we do see a significant reduction in the caregiver's burden in this group of patients whom we are managing and supporting. And last but definitely not least, we do not forget the group of professional caregivers. This could be the frontline people who are working in the day centers, in the nursing home. They do take care of the elderly with dementia day in, day out. And so G-Rays do work closely with them. We provide basic and intermediate trainings to our partners. We teach them about the symptoms of dementia, of depression, in screening the elderly for dementia and depression, as well as the intermediate training that targets on communication with the elderly, as well as managing the behavior and psychological symptoms of dementia. We have also started our mental health workshop. It's a skill-based workshop where we have role plays, we have demonstration of how to use behavioral techniques to manage the behavioral and psychological symptoms of dementia. We demonstrate communication techniques. And lastly, we do visits to the different day centers as well as the nursing homes to engage in case discussions, in advice about some challenges that they do face when they manage this group of patients. And so I must say, despite all these expectations that we have, all this stress that they're going through, ultimately with intervention, with support, with help, caregiving can be a very rewarding role at the end of the day. And I've got this phrase that I found from a book. It says, "I may have forgotten who you are, but when you hold my hand, I remember your warmth and love." So I hope with all this support, we can get the caregivers to have a very rewarding role in giving care to dementia elderly at the end of the day. So that's it. Thank you.
It's a panel discussion time for not 3 but 2 speakers. And the good news of Symposium 3 is that we are ahead of time. Either you prolong the panel discussion or we prolong the tea time. How's it? Housekeeping, at 3, we will have tea time instead of 3:10. Good news? Good news of aging. Questions from the floor. Questions from the floor? Yes, Prof.
Thank you. Yeah, I want to ask about the home visit. Were there any incidences, or were there many incidences of wandering and elopement behavior? And does the intervention actually helps in improving the situation?
Can you hear me? Okay. There are incidences of wandering, but I think with intervention and education of the family and caregivers, we've seen a reduction in that. While we don't specifically capture that as an isolated behavior in our data, but just anecdotally from the patients that we see, we do see a reduction in it. And we do have, I mean, as many of you will probably know, the Alzheimer's Disease Association has a safe return card that we can apply for. And apart from that, we also have had some more creative solutions like using GPS trackers for some families. So we drop it in the bag of the elderly patient. But by and large, with the safety advice that we give to families, that has been reduced. So ensuring that they don't have the main door keys, ensuring that the caregiver is with them most of the time 24/7. And when all that fails, there's always the safe return card and GPS tracking.
Because the reason why I asked that is that current, at least from my view, in terms of collective care, the preference is to put dementia patient into a gated compound, right, like a nursing home and so forth. And that sort of contradict the argument for autonomy and self-reliance and so forth, and a normalized kind of routine in the community, which is supposedly to improve or rather arrest the further decline of dementia. So wandering and elopement is one of the major challenges, at least from the design point of view, how to ensure that the safety of the dementia patient without restraining them within the house or within the gated compound. So I'm just wondering whether the clinician here have their views about this particular point of view, between safety versus autonomy.
Yeah, well, maybe I add a point to that. It's also a lot about the meaningful engagement of the elderly at home as well, all right? When they're not engaged, they have nothing to do, they tend to, they wander off and they walk around. So that's one thing. And of course, we do see elderly, as we said, there's safe return card, there's GPS trackers that we use nowadays. But it's a lot in the community. We have elderly who are sort of quite well known in their community. They have neighbors who know them, even stall holders from the coffee shops. And again, they work together as a community really to help these elderly, even to get them back to their house. So I thought that was a very encouraging kind of a scene that we are seeing, given all the talks this morning about the community.
Yeah, thank you.
Just to add a little to that, I guess your question was also about how to balance safety versus autonomy. And I think it's always going to be a very delicate and fine balance. But if you put yourself in the shoes of someone who is going to be old in the future or be part of the aging process, I think personally I would think I favor autonomy slightly over safety, especially since in this day and age we can utilize lots of new technologies to ensure that safety measures are in place.
Yes, Shannon, somebody asked a question. Okay. She's running all over the place, very hardworking. Shannon. Say again. One final question. Anyone? Yes.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Jean from St. Luke's Hospital. I'm an occupational therapist. Actually, I have quite a few questions because I'm very interested in what you have been doing under G-Rays. Yeah, so may I know how do you all decide when you all do the home visits? Like, is it on a routine basis or like is it ad hoc? And maybe is it like based on their needs? So like which clinician goes down or which profession goes down? Yeah, and like maybe how labor intensive it is lah. Because sometimes I know you can spend like maybe quite a number of hours with the caregiver just to talk to them, and or to even like deliver your intervention. Because even if like the therapist brings down some activities, right, you might not know what will work and what will not lah. Yep, thank you.
Well, like I mentioned earlier in my talk, there are two arms of the service. The ones that I presented were the home clinic, where the doctor goes down with a case manager or an occupational therapist. The other arm, the allied health intervention, is the one where the doctor doesn't go down. So the elderly is usually still fairly mobile, can come to the clinic for their medical care, but it's the OTs who go down to make sure that the environment survey is done, the activity scheduling is done. And of course, I think it's hard to really give a fixed figure as to how long each visit takes. Typically, for a first visit, my experience with the home clinic is that it can take anywhere from 1 hour or up, depending on the complexity of the case. And the first visit is really the time where we use to elicit sort of what kind of activities we can bring at subsequent visits. Subsequent visits wouldn't take very much, definitely not 1 hour lah. For subsequent visits, around half an hour to 45 minutes at most, because we need to schedule several visits in a day as far as possible. As I mentioned to you before in the presentation, cost effectiveness is also a concern. Yeah. I hope that answers your question.
Any more questions before I ask one more question? This outside your talk. Dr. Emiko is also not here. No politicians here? Hiding, maybe you can answer this question. In the light that caregivers ourselves are also aging, we will one day, will we be extinct? Will be extinct. What measures do you see in the foreseeable future to arrest this trend or to put in place solutions for this problem of diminishing caregivers? Families, granted, are small now, small. Our children are migrating, are working overseas, and somehow they forgot where the red dot is. They forgot. Yeah.
Yeah, indeed, we have seen a lot of caregivers who are elderly themselves, and they themselves have very poor short-term memory, and perhaps in their early stages of dementia, and that's something of concern. So again, we are glad that there are increasing numbers of community resources for these elderly, such as drop-in centers. We have a lot of centers at the void decks, and even people from people's associations who have been popping by to bring people down, engaging these elderlies to be in the centers in the daytime where there are people to supervise them, to engage them in the activities. We are really looking forward to having more of these resources in the community, especially to work with architects and people who design environment, to see how we can build such a community to better support these elderly.
I suppose just to add to that, given the fact that fewer caregivers for each elderly patient, it's really about riding the technology bandwagon and harnessing the potential in that. So I think there's a lot of research going on as to how we can utilize sensors and robotics, and I think that's also a field that as clinicians, we also need to jump on this trend.
May I add also, we have robots for waiters and waitresses in the restaurant. What do you think, robot caregivers, minus the heart?
a lot of things comes from the heart. Huh? So again, there are a lot of things that robots cannot replace. All right, so well, I guess we can process the robots, we can train them with skills, but ultimately there's this lack of emotions. As I said, elderlies might not understand you, but they can sense your expression, your body language. I think that's still pretty important.
Thank you very much, Emily. Thank you. A big hand to them. And on behalf of the society, token of appreciation, Dr. Emily. Dr. Iris. Thank you very much. Okay, we look forward to an extended tea time. Be back at 3:25.
Right, thank you everyone, and thank you once again to Mr. Lawrence Wee and our two speakers, Dr. Iris and Dr. Emily. I'd just like to urge you to stay on after tea break, so please don't disappear after the tea break because we still have a very interesting panel waiting for you after the tea break. Just to add that just now, if you haven't gone to view the posters that's at the foyer, please do so during the tea break now that Lawrence has given you a longer tea break. But I would still like to propose that we come back by 3:15 so that we can all leave at 5 o'clock, right, and see the sun. Right, so please do come back at 3:15. As for the posters, actually there is a poster competition, and just now our judges have already gone round during lunch. Results have been decided. So when you come back at the end of Symposium 4, we'll actually be conducting the prize presentation ceremony. So please do come back after the tea break. See you at 3:15. Thank you.